need to take the chaos and make them repeated, because not only does it become more consistent for our users, but it becomes well-defined and therefore delegatable. So the things I do as a senior sysadmin and feel I can't delegate, well, if I could turn it into a repeatable process, I can delegate it to the junior sysadmin. And as an entry-level sysadmin who doesn't feel very competent because they're new and sort of feeling their way around in this new and weird environment, to have well-defined things that I can give to them, that they love that, and that's how we train people. And if you can identify it, and so this is the restaurant of the future, they would say, well, we have this well-defined thing, and one person can do it as a specialization. Well, now we can automate it. And so the restaurant of the future would just have a little spigot at each desk. You've automated the process. People can get their own damn water. and now you're self-service. Exactly. So maybe that'll be my next book. All about repeatability. Okay. That's a big tangent from, this is a chapter on decision making. So be data-driven. Rather than try to convince someone, show them the data and let them make the decision. So there's a great YouTube video, tinyurl.com/ddculture, data-driven culture. This guy gives a great talk about changing your organization to be data-driven. And his example is sitting in marketing meetings, and they're trying to decide, should we go with this advertisement or this advertisement? And the manager or the VP really likes the ad that no one else likes. But because he's the VP, you go with that ad, and the campaign is not a success. And he says, instead, on the internet, you can run both ads for the first day and look at the data of which one had the best performance, and then run the winning ad for the rest of time, or for the rest of the campaign. And you don't tell the VP, look, you were going to pick the stupid one. You show him the graph, and he says, well, obviously we should use this other one. And that takes the politics out. It takes a lot of the problems out. And if the data comes back and a third-party observer looking at the graph doesn't say, obviously, we should go with ad B or ad A, well, then they really aren't different. And maybe the problem with deciding is that you need to go back to the drawing board. So how do we apply this to system administration? How many people here have had an overloaded internet connection and your boss didn't want to buy more bandwidth? Yeah, happens all the time. Can't people just surf less? So a data-driven way of dealing with this situation is to have your monitoring system produce a graph of how much bandwidth has been used. And if you can show, maybe once a month you show your boss this graph, and you say, well, so here's my monthly status report. Tickets, we've got the help desk is going great. We've got the new machine deployments doing great. Oh, and here's a graph of our bandwidth usage. And you show that it's going out this way. And you show this every month. And then once your boss gets used to that, you start saying, oh, and here's the bandwidth graph this month. And if you notice, the trajectory is going that way. And when it hits that point, it's full and we'll have to buy more. And so now you've warmed your boss up to this concept. And if you've done a really good job, you don't even have to mention that. Your boss says, hey, does that mean that when we get to this point, it's full and I have to buy more? And you say, great idea, boss. I'll work out the PO. Maybe it's too expensive, and he says, well, we have to find out a difference. We need a packet prioritization system or something. But you're being data-driven instead of, well, from the manager's perspective, managers think everyone just whines they want faster, internet access. Now you're being data-driven. So what are some other ways we can be data-driven in our system administration? Number of hits per website. Sure. If you're not collecting a historical graph of hits per hour, you can't measure things as well. You can't make decisions. Yes?
We use SAR data
Oh, using SAR data, so that's the system accounting, system activity report on Unix.
IO, CPU usage, especially RAM usage.
Okay.
By updating RAM or buying better machine.
Okay, so it lets you see RAM and I/O and disk usage, thrashing. Right. So, and something you can do with that is if you take all of, I used to generate data like that, and I didn't know what to do with it until someone pointed out, well, you don't have to be too sophisticated. If you know how much disk I/O is happening on each server, if you just ordered them best to worst, or most active to least active, probably every month you want to fix one or two that are at the top end. And that might mean, it's not really sophisticated, but you're not going to, it's better than being paralyzed with the inability to make a decision. I'm in a situation where we rank something, so it's every month when we make the on-call schedule, the pager schedule for the next quarter. So, right, every quarter we make the schedule for the next quarter, and it system looks at the pager system and determines how many hours each person has been on call in the previous quarter, and basically people don't want to be on the bottom of that list. You don't want to be in the bottom 50% of who's been taking turns, right? So it encourages people. It's a self-correcting system. Coase.
Mail server farm with one fallback mail server for everything that doesn't go and get up the first time. And okay. I think we need two of them. And Boss says, do we really need two fallback mail servers? Why? And I go, okay, let me try making one of the other mail servers a fallback for a short time. I wrote a script that went through the logs and gave you per hour averages of how long each message has been waiting before it's retried. Ran that for a couple of days, switched another server into being a second fallback, and showed the graph and how it changed.
So a not so technical manager says, no, I don't think that this other configuration would be good. So he tried it both ways and collected data. This was a bulk email sending service, not spam, we promise, I know him. And so one server does the first try, and if it fails, it goes to another machine that does all the retries. And you thought that more retry servers would be beneficial, so you tried it both ways and showed the graph. And if the graphs weren't convincing enough, maybe that means you're wrong. Yeah.
Using failure rates, like more specifically, justifying buying more expensive hardware. The one that comes to mind is like SATA drives versus the enterprise class SCSI drives in cloud-based systems.
Oh, sure. So monitoring failure rates and being able to determine, brands that are failing more, or SATA versus IDE or whatever that are failing more. There's a paper. So at Google, we collect data on our own systems, like in such huge detail. And we published a paper last summer or the summer before, about 2 years ago, about sort of data mining the hard disk temperature data that we had collected for 10 years. And what we found was that this whole you have to keep hard disks cool thing was not true. The failure rates were related to consistent temperature, not high or low temperature. So it's an interesting paper to read. It's interesting just because it's like you collected that much data. Yes?
There's an interesting use case at rackspace.com for mail division.
Mm-hmm.
I do look
Hey,
at
I'm with rackspace.com for mail division. Nice to meet you.
Okay.
using their customers' IP addresses to determine geographically where they all were, where to buy service.
Oh. So they decided where to buy new colo space by looking at the IP addresses of, well, they did geolocation of the IP addresses. So they saw where their customers were based on their IP addresses and decided to buy new servers in those locations to get better service, better latency. Right, so I bet there was a ton of debate over like, oh no, I want a Florida data center because I'd love to go fixing servers near the beach. But then it became data driven. We don't have any, we really have more customers in Texas. And so, damn. Yes?
I'm told that I can't replace a server because it's in use 24 hours a day.
I can't replace a server because it's in use 24 hours a day. Well, a graph would find out if that's true.
Exactly how much use. So yeah, it is being used 24 hours a day, like
8,000 times at 1 p.m. and 80 times at 1 a.m.
So the graph found that it's not used 24 hours a day. It's really, on average, it's used 24 hours a day, but it's really a cron job that kicks off at 1 a.m. or something. Sure. Yeah, ISPs find, there's certain hours, if it's not latency driven, you can do things where certain servers are doing, web service for Europe during one part of the day and US in the other part of the day, and the idle time, each has opposite idle time, and that idle time is used for batch processing or something. Yeah?
That reminds me for a social networking website where we were rolling out new locations around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It came time to figure out when you do the upgrade. It wasn't really obvious what the least use time is, but we always had graphs going of the hits. So we'd always go, we need to do a maintenance. Let's look at the graphs for the past week. Let's look at where the trough is. That's the time for the next
week. Good point. And a neat thing to look at your graph is watch where daylight savings time changes, and if there's a big squiggle and it went back in time, then you're not setting your servers to UTC. Yes?
So it's fun because it's like the meta argument for how we are running null now, because for a while we had a problem where people went, oh, I need a machine, and they get the new machine and they set it up, and then at some point you realize it's overpowered for what it used to be, or it's underpowered, and we've already bought the hardware, or we just allocated more disk than we needed, and people complain that why didn't we do this beforehand, so we made a process. So now when you want to say, oh, I got a 6-year-old machine, dumbass, and I really need to go and convert it, and I'd like just a pair of little VMs. Even a pair of little VMs. I had to fill out a form and show use cases, and one was MX and one was print. So there's, I don't need 16 gigs, but that's the minimum. But yeah, this is how big it can get. Here's the data I put last month. Here's the smallest amount of space to use. Here's the most. Here's how many prints with the mail that went through it. I had to give them all of this now. So we are data driven. It's kind of weird though because.
Okay, so now that you're using a virtualized environment where you can give.
For hardware machines, you have to do it too. You're doing it.
But you're.
The virtual machine.
Sure, I'm just trying to reflect back what you're saying. Actually knowing how much RAM and disk and other things a machine needs is important in a virtualized environment because you're requesting a machine of a certain size instead of the old days where you just got a machine and it might have been too big, but that was okay.
Right.
Yeah.
The main thing though I was trying to get across is even at this point, spending money for a physical machine is special. Getting a VM is not easy, but it's the default. But even the default is overpowered for a lot of the things we're doing. But even then, you still can't get even the big air quotes, dinky VM without proving that you need it.
Right.
So everything is data driven now, even little.
Right. Right. So if you're being data driven to death, maybe you want to factor that out and make sure that your monitoring's in place so it's less of a burden to you.
Or do an analysis of how long it takes to get a VM up because of all the data you have to collect to justify it. So look how much time it takes.
Trust me, they're working on the meta of the meta argument.
Right.
So the second part is about half of the stuff I was doing in the Gantt chart, I was done with before they got their asses in gear. Because it was all preliminary work before the VM was made. I started to both at the same time. So.
Right. So next pattern, tying infrastructure to company initiatives. It's important to align. So infrastructure often doesn't get the priority it deserves. No one cares about infrastructure. People care about applications. And yet applications can't run well if you don't have good infrastructure. So how can you, if you have a management that doesn't appreciate the need for infrastructure, how can you fix this problem? You could try to educate them, or you could just tie infrastructure changes to important company initiatives. So a friend of mine a number of years ago was at a university, and he said, Tom, you wouldn't believe this university president, he doesn't even know what multimedia is, but he thinks it's the future, and he keeps saying, we have to have a multimedia network, and this guy doesn't even know that our LAN, he doesn't understand our LAN's crumbling, it's falling apart, it's this old 10BASE-T network. And I said, no, that sounds like the solution. You just have to tell him, how do you build a multimedia network? Well, the first step is you need a new LAN that's modern and up to date. At a previous company, I my users were complaining endlessly that we didn't have a single sign-on system, and every little app had its own little database, password database. And this was a 100-person company, and we had, I think, 100 different passwords you had to memorize. And the CEO didn't want to spend money on like a couple servers for LDAP and Kerberos and just a nice, simple system. So I said, no problem. The next time he comes to me and says, we absolutely have to have something, I'm going to suddenly remember that that kind of thing requires LDAP. And we got what we wanted. And I don't think this is unethical, because it's really, it was true. To have a good multimedia network, you need a network that works. Otherwise, it's the net don't work. And to have the applications that he wanted working successfully, we needed to have a single sign-on system. It was becoming unmanageable. Okay. Yes? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Sure. Yeah. So they wouldn't approve more storage, but he showed that the management said we're going to grow by this % a year, and you came back and said, here's the data. When we grow this much, we need to grow. Storage grows this much. So therefore, if you're predicting, what a wonderful thing to be able to predict my growth instead of having to be random. Thank you, sir. And let me tell you what ramifications it has. Our data shows this kind of storage growth, and he then approved the budget. Good point. I struggled for years. When I was at Bell Labs, I wanted to have like a very junior entry-level sysadmin that did nothing but deploy new PCs, so that I didn't have people with good programming skills spending time wheeling carts down the hallway. And couldn't get it approved, and then they said, we want to grow X% a year, and I drew a graph, and it was on his whiteboard. It was hand-waving numbers, but I said, for the last 30 years, Bell Labs has been 1,000 PhDs, and I drew this graph of, so the sysadmin work for that has been basically constant, but every time someone retires, and then we hire a replacement, we get the first 6 months that anyone works here, we have more work. So I drew a little hump and said, these are the various times that someone's retired and we hired a replacement. And I said, but you're saying we're going to, I don't remember what it was, double its size over the next 5 years. That's going to make the graph go like this, which means the humps go like this up the hill, and they're closer together. And I said, so now installing new machines, gosh, it's practically a full-time job. Hey, if it's a full-time job, why don't we have someone doing it full-time? And we hired someone that was, like someone's kid brother who was just perfectly happy to image a machine and wheel it down the hallway. And it turned out he was a big wheeler dealer. He took over negotiations with our vendors. And also, if you were buying a car, he'd come with you and get you a crazy discount. The guy was incredible. It's like, I have to buy a stereo. No problem. I got a stereo and a DVD player. How did that happen? Great guy, and and he I'm sure his negotiations with, I do know the negotiations with the vendors paid his own salary very soon, because we showed data. Sure. Okay. Ding, ding, ding. Chapter 3, patterns for user relations. So now I tend to refer to my user base as my customers, not sort of internal customers, and as opposed to the people hitting my website, my external customers. But so what are our patterns for our customer relations? I think one of the most important patterns is creating a good first impression. A good first impression is sort of like, think of goodwill as a bank account. If you have ever, when you have money in the bank, life is good. And then if you get into debt, it's really hard to dig out of that debt. And if you start life in debt, you can often be in a situation where you're never really going to get out of that debt. Well, goodwill is very similar. If you start with a good first impression with a new hire, then you've started with a surplus in your goodwill bank account with that user, and you can make mistakes later on, and your user will be very forgiving because, hey, you have a couple points in that goodwill bank account. If you start out on your first day with that user, or on that user's first day, if you just look disorganized and really screw up, you've made a bad first impression, and you've started in debt, and it's going to be very difficult to crawl out. So how can we start out in a good situation? You want to make their first day awesome. And awesome for an employee is pretty easy to figure out. Think about your first day at a new job. You're generally pretty terrified. It's new, it's scary, you don't know what you're going to do. You're waiting for the shoe to drop when you find out the difference between what they told you in the interview and what your job actually is. So you can give them some comfort on that first day by making sure on their first day their PC, phone, all their accounts, everything can work. In fact, a motivating statement that I use with my staff is I say, we want people to do software development on their first day. That really, to be able to do that, that means all these other things were in place. They had an account, they had a home directory, etc. Their compilers were set up. A friend of mine worked at a certain insurance company and didn't get a PC for the first 2 months, and then didn't get a C compiler on her PC for another month. She only got that because she copied the files off another machine and hoped that without the proper install procedure it would just work. And really at month 5, she was still unable to get work done, and she quit at month 6. And she's like, you know why that insurance company has really high prices? It's because of people like me. Because they paid me for 6 months, and they couldn't get their act together enough to make me a productive employee, and I quit. So we want totally the opposite of what my friend Tina went through. So first thing, everything available on the first day. Some other nice things, we can visit them on the first day and give them an orientation session. Hi, I'm Tom. I'm from the IT group. How's your PC? Oh, great. If you need any help, we have a ticket system. You just send email to help at blah, blah, blah. Or if you type help into your web browser, it'll go to our ticket system. There's a little FAQ on the side. And if you need any help, just let me know. That 5-minute conversation can really build a lot of goodwill. You can build even more if you come back a week later and have the exact same conversation. Because on that first day, it's like drinking from the fire hose, getting so much information. But so if you come back, you can you might want to repeat it and leave them with something physical, like a piece of paper that's a summary of what you just told them, how to get help, common websites, that kind of thing. Really good step into making a good first impression. And if you make a good first impression with every new employee, eventually you'll have a good first impression with all employees because of turnover. So here's some useful tools. Oh, right. So the first tool is you have to know when new people are coming. Wait, did I skip? Yeah. Oh, let me just rearrange this a little. So for people to have a PC that works on time on the first day, it's important to have a standard install image. But for them to even have that desktop on their first day, you really have to know that they're coming. So how do we know that people are hired? How many people know when new users are hired in their organization? And how many people it's like they just magically show up? Yeah, you have an interview process that takes a month and you have to battle with HR and get 50 million approvals, but for some reason the IT team doesn't know until they've already been in the building 3 hours. Yeah, that's crazy. So what you want to do is you want to find out when people are starting. You can find out by rumors. You can be on the official checklist. I assure you someone has a checklist, a new employee landing checklist, and somehow get on that checklist. And if they won't put you on the checklist, say, well, can I be on the checklist just as a unofficial warning so we could start loading their machine, and explain the undeniable value. We want their first day to be awesome. This is at one company that we did this. We then convinced the company to do it globally, and they called it their soft landing initiative, that they wanted all new employees to have a soft landing when they came in. Also, another way of finding out when new people are hired is bribe the right people. So the secretaries that really run your company, they know when someone's coming because they're processing all this paperwork. And bribes to secretaries is totally ethical as long as you stay within your budget. And if you were in my morning session, I went through this, but the summary is your secretary that you need to bribe, a good bribe, is a new PC. And I know you can get that for her or him. Bigger monitor. So, right, a new PC is a little risky because if moving the software to the new PC doesn't work exactly right, you've lost a friend. But a very low risk thing to do is take that big tube monitor and replace it with a flat panel, and replace their keyboard with a nicer keyboard, or give them a choice of 3 in a catalog and let them pick. Because especially if you go to like the Dell refurb site, you can get a new flat panel and keyboard for very cheap. And make sure that they know that this is in return for their promise to warn you when new people are being hired. And B, if anyone says, hey, how come you got a new monitor? If it's a fellow secretary asking her, she has to say, well, because I have this deal, I tell them when new people are hiring and being hired. And you could get the same deal too if you want a monitor. Totally ethical, totally ethical. Especially, I hate to say this, I said it in the morning, but I'll say it again. Especially, just get them a nicer monitor than that person that they don't like. So, we've come up with our communication system. Now we need the new hire timeline. Maybe you've agreed with HR on this timeline. Maybe you're just taking the initiative to do it yourself. But next slide is an example of the timeline. Pre-purchase your desktops and laptops. Have a stock of 2 or 3, or even just one is better. One machine that's preloaded and ready to deploy is better than none. If you know you're going to be hiring a lot, get permission to hire, to buy new machines as fast as you're hiring. Some kind of automated install. What automated install systems do people use in the room? Yes?
You use flying a lot for Linux servers?
Linux servers use what?
Linux desktop. Fully automated install.
Fully automated install. F-I-E. F-A-E. Okay. F-A-I. I can spell. Public school. Okay, so fully automated install for Linux. Jumpstart for Solaris. What is Windows? NetBoot on FreeBSD, and Windows changed the name of what they used to be called something. Now it's RIS, Remote Install Server. Yeah. So in fact, we found, at a previous job, we reduced the number of tickets from new users. New users were submitting like twice as many tickets as normal users, and that became almost the same number as normal users when we went to an automated install system, because they were getting a machine that was consistent and configured properly. And when I say automated, it's got to be automated 100%, that you start the process and then walk away and it just works. I just heard a story recently about the creation of the Amazon one-click purchasing, that the CEO said, oh, we want to do one-click purchasing, and he told his engineering team, and they were like, yeah, that'll be great. And they came back a while later, and they said, yeah, we're ready for the demo. And as they did the demo, he counted 4 clicks. And he said, that's great, but it's 3 clicks more than 1 click. I'm like, nope, this is the best we can do. And he said, we'll come back when it's 1 click. And it turned out the real problem, what they didn't want to do was if you've ever used one-click, it's one-click buying, but then you have 30 minutes to change your mind. And their ordering system was such that there was no delay. I mean, they prided themselves that once an order went in, it was in and being activated on. So they had to add a delay system. And that was going to be a major system change. And it wasn't until that was done that they got it down to exactly one click. OS install is very similar. I've been to many sites. Oh yeah, we've totally automated the install. You install, and then you log in as root and change these 3 things. It's like, okay, gotta get it down to automated. Because once it's totally automated, it's self-service. You can tell users, hey, if you want to wipe your machine, and you know by wiping your machine, I mean lose all your data, that's not on the server. Boot, press F12, you get a little menu, and re-image your machine. Where I work, anyone can re-image their own machine. The developers, and even non-developers, heaven forbid that non-developers would do it, but it's there. It's taken that task away from sysadmins now. Loading operating systems is not something that we do. Yes?
Something that I did with to solve some of this problem at a previous job was I actually used the data. I said, if we buy these 10 new desktops and laptops for all the employees you're hiring this quarter, together, then we're going to save 30%.
Right.
Over if we buy them one at a time, and then as a side effect of that, if you know how many people are going to be hired, what departments they're going to be hired in, you can have those boxes image the day they come in, and then all you've got to do is just run updates on them as soon as the person arrives.
Right. Yeah, and your CFO hopefully understands that bulk purchases. If your CFO knows 10 people really are going to be hired this quarter, and you buy in bulk, and if you can provide data like the 30% savings from buying 10 at a time, and he or she can then say, well, but I know that the depreciation, so those machines are going to sit idle for, on average, half a quarter each, but they can do the calculation to see if that outweighs the 30%. And you can counter with, well, if I spend one day imaging 10 machines instead of stopping every once in a while to image a machine, you can go back and forth and figure out the value. And believe me, your truth is on your side. Yeah. So what does a new hire timeline checklist look like? Prior to hiring, we have a form that we send to people, or whoever the hiring person is, either their administrative assistant might be managing the new hire process, or we have an HR person might be the single point of contact. So prior to hiring, the form is given to the person. It comes back, and copies are given to person. In parentheses, who owns doing this item. That the desk location is selected the Thursday before the arrival. Accounts are created, workstations installed. By doing this, since I mentioned all new hires start on Monday at my company, doing things on Thursday means if something goes wrong, you have Friday to fix it. The day of, the IT department welcome wagon makes their visit, and 1 week later, the welcome wagon visits a second time to make sure the person's doing well. So how many people have some kind of timeline or checklist like this? Okay, great. So that's a good homework assignment for those of you who don't. Similarly, you can make a checklist for new machines. You can automate everything, but you can't automate. You can automate everything in the install procedure, but installing the machine is a much bigger process. So maybe there's some kind of inventory that needs to be updated. Financial systems need to be updated with depreciation codes and stuff. Let's see. Specific hardware to deliver, what to record in inventory. Maybe you have a checklist for each kind of server. That certain server, our IDS servers have a different checklist from the mail servers. And maybe there's a whole checklist for what is the process for getting rack space allocated and doing the installation. Another useful checklist to have is the decommissioning checklist. So check off that the disk erase procedure was done, that the asset database was updated, that it's given to, you have some kind of disposal process. Do you sell it? Do you destroy it? Are employees allowed to take it home? That kind of thing. So I'm infatuated with checklists. If you've noticed, I just rattled through 3 very quickly. I love checklists, and this is an excellent topic because we have 4 minutes left, so I'll go on my checklist rant. Checklists let you think once, do many. I might be the senior sysadmin that's smart enough to be able to come up with what's on the checklist, but the second time through, I have less thinking to do because I've put it in the checklist. And as I get older, the more important those checklists get. It also lets me improve things. You know, I've done 20 installs each time using the checklist. On install number 20, I realized, hey, this would be so much better if I did blah, blah, blah. And I update the checklist. So we're continually improving things. So I'm getting organizational improvement. If 5 of us all work from the same checklist, maybe the things that Joe thinks of adding to the checklist are awesome things that I would have never thought of. And so now we're collaboratively improving a process. And we also get consistency. Maybe Joe and I both install new machines, and we do it very differently. By being more consistent, we serve our users better. In fact, users would prefer consistency over quality. Think about it. If there's a coffee shop that makes consistently bad coffee, they will have more customers than if on some days it's bad and some days it's good. Because if they're consistently bad or bad in the same way, the people that just for some reason like their coffee that way, they're going to know that they can rely on that, and they're always going to go there, and you'll develop a customer base. But if you have some days good, some days bad, you're going to go to that coffee place across the street because you don't know what you're getting at that other place. You don't like to play the lottery with something as important as coffee. And it's very similar with services. If machines always come perfectly configured, but I know I have to change that one setting in Microsoft Word that I like, that's great, because I know my sysadmins always give me that consistency, and I can change that one thing in Microsoft Word that I like to change. But if every time I get a PC, the configuration is totally different, and sometimes they move where the apps are and stuff, users are going to be like, what is going on in that organization? Why can't they do anything consistently? So very important. Also, checklists make it easier to delegate. The senior sysadmin might be able to create the checklist because they have the knowledge, both technically and politically, of what needs to be done, but the junior people can execute on the checklist. In fact, to a junior person, that structure is very comforting and empowering. You know, I know what to do because I'm following this checklist. And they're not being micromanaged now because I can just work my checklist, and if I don't know how to do step 3, then I can go ask for help instead of my senior person looming over me saying, now do this, now do this, now do this. It also defines a promotion path. In some organizations, when you're an expert, the definition of promotion from maybe you have not just junior and senior sysadmins, but maybe you have like 5 levels of pay grades. There are some very well organized places where a level 0 person is expected to be, you know, learning basic procedures, and those basic procedures are these 10 checklists. You know, how to install our servers and our this and our that, and maybe do these other functions. And if you want to get a promotion, well, start learning the next 5 checklists, because that's the gateway to your moving from a level 0 to a level 1 pay grade. This is very common in the military, that everything is a well-defined procedure, and your ability to get promotions is based on which checklists you've learned. Senior sysadmin creating checklists, other people doing them, and then you get some nice domino effects. Like you can, maybe you don't feel that you can automate the whole checklist, but step 5 is really error prone, and we can automate that, or turn it from a very long command line to just typing the name of a shell script. So if you're in an environment where you say, oh, we never have time to automate things, well, checklists are a good way of it's sort of like the analog version of automation, and then it gives you the courage to automate specific steps in a checklist. And now you're doing some automation, which is better than no automation. Maybe you're just maybe you're automating to remove error instead of make things faster. But the best thing about checklists is it lets you hire your own assistant. So your boss comes to you and says, Tom, and you say, my name's not Tom. Your boss comes, oh, wait a minute, I don't want you to be late. I will tell you how to hire your own assistant after the break. We'll see you in 1/2 hour. Enjoy the cookies. There will be no cookies. Maybe there's brownies.
There's something about playing it.